When we think of heroes, we often picture men in capes. But my grandfather wore no cape, just a dusty uniform and a heart full of courage. He was wounded, bled, and kept fighting in World War II. He earned a Purple Heart, but more importantly, he earned our eternal respect. Before we begin, I'd like to invite you to join me on this journey of remembrance. If stories of sacrifice and resilience touch your heart, please like this video, subscribe for more life stories, and share it with someone who values history. Together, let's keep their memory alive. I want to begin by painting a picture of my grandfather, not as the soldier history books might mention, but as the man who raised me with gentle wisdom. To me, he was a quiet giant. His hands were rough, his smile soft, his words few but powerful. Growing up, I never realized the depth of his past. He would sit on the porch in the evenings, staring at the horizon as if searching for something invisible. His eyes carried a weight that I couldn't name as a child. Later, I would come to understand that weight was memory. My grandfather wasn't the kind of man who bragged about medals or victories. He never sought praise. He believed service was a duty, not an achievement. And yet, hidden in an old wooden box under his bed was proof of his bravery, a Purple Heart, a medal given only to those wounded or killed in battle. To a child, a shiny medal is just decoration. But as I grew older, I realized it symbolized the price of freedom. It meant he had been shot at, injured, and had still chosen to go on. It meant he placed his country and his comrades above himself. When I finally asked him about it, he looked at me for a long time before answering. He didn't tell me about glory. He told me about fear, about the smell of smoke and blood, about the silence after an explosion, when you don't know if your friends are still alive. He spoke slowly, not to dramatize, but because the memories came like fragile glass, each one heavy, each one sharp. And then he said something I'll never forget. I didn't fight because I wanted to be a hero. I fought because someone had to stand up. If not me, then who? That was my grandfather, not a man of titles, but a man of duty. To truly understand his sacrifice, we have to step back in time. The year was the early 1940s. The world was on fire. Nazi Germany was sweeping through Europe. Japan had bombed Pearl Harbor. Fear and uncertainty gripped the globe. My grandfather was a young man then, barely in his 20s. He had dreams like anyone else, dreams of building a family, of farming his land, of living a peaceful life. But war doesn't ask what your dreams are. It interrupts them. It takes them. When the call to serve came, he didn't hesitate. He enlisted, not knowing if he would ever come home again. My grandmother told me she remembered that day vividly. He kissed her hand, smiled a smile that didn't reach his eyes, and said, "I'll be back. But if I don't come back, remember I went for you." That's the kind of love and courage that shaped our family. Training was grueling. He had never been far from his hometown, and suddenly he was surrounded by men from all walks of life. Farmers, teachers, factory workers, all transformed into soldiers overnight. They were taught to march, to shoot, to survive, but no training could prepare them for the reality of war. Soon he found himself shipped overseas. He wrote letters back home, letters my grandmother kept, yellowed with age, folded with care. In those letters, he didn't describe the horrors. Instead, he asked about the crops, about her health, about the neighbors. He spared her the pain, carrying it all inside himself. And yet, between the lines, you could read the truth. His words were steady, but his handwriting shook. The war was not just battles and strategy. It was mud in your boots, hunger in your belly, fear in your chest. It was watching friends fall beside you and knowing you had to keep moving. It was here, in the chaos of battle, that he would earn his Purple Heart. It was somewhere in Europe. He never told me the exact location. He said the place wasn't important. The people were. His unit had been advancing, clearing villages that had been reduced to rubble. Civilians hid in basements, their faces pale, their children silent with terror. The enemy fought fiercely. My grandfather and his men pressed forward, every step a gamble. And then it happened. Gunfire erupted. And in the storm of bullets, my grandfather was hit. He described it to me once, his voice steady but his hands trembling. "It feels like fire burning through your body," he said. "But the worst part isn't the pain, it's the thought that you might not see the sunrise again." He fell, but he didn't stay down. With blood soaking his uniform, he dragged himself to cover, returning fire to protect his brothers in arms. He was determined not to let the wound define his last moments. A medic reached him, risking his own life. They patched him up as best they could, and somehow my grandfather survived. Many didn't. for his bravery and for the wounds he suffered. He was awarded the Purple Heart. Yet when I asked him about it, he brushed it off. The real heroes, he said softly, are the ones who never made it back. That humility defined him. He carried the scar, both physical and emotional, for the rest of his life. But he never wore it as a badge of honor. He wore it as a reminder of those who sacrificed everything. When the war ended, the world celebrated. But soldiers carried home invisible wounds. My grandfather returned with shrapnel in his leg and silence in his heart. The day he came back, the whole town gathered. Flags waved, people cheered. But my grandmother said he simply walked quietly into their home, hugged her, and sat down at the table as though he had just come back from a long day at work. He rarely spoke of the war, not because he wanted to forget, but because he wanted us to live free of its shadows. He took up farming again, raising his children, building a life from the soil. But at night sometimes, he would wake up sweating, eyes wide open, caught in battles only he could see. That's something we often forget. Heroes aren't just those who fought in the war. They're also those who lived after it, carrying their memories silently so the next generation could have peace. As I grew older, I began to realize the depth of what his Purple Heart meant. It wasn't just a medal. It was a story, a sacrifice, a reminder that freedom has a price. He taught me values that shaped my life: discipline, resilience, compassion. He showed me that true strength isn't loud. It's quiet, steady, enduring. One day, I asked him why he kept the medal tucked away instead of displaying it proudly. He looked at me with kind but firm eyes. "Because it's not about me," he said. "It's about them, all the boys who didn't come home. When you see this medal, don't think of me. Think of them." And so, every time I see that Purple Heart, I think not just of my grandfather, but of millions like him. Ordinary men and women who stepped into extraordinary roles because the world needed them. Why tell this story today, decades later? Because we live in a time where history can feel distant, where the sacrifices of those before us fade into statistics in textbooks. But these were real people. They had names, faces, families. They laughed, they dreamed, they bled. My grandfather's story teaches us resilience. He faced fear but chose courage. He faced wounds but chose to keep going. He faced loss but chose to build a life afterward. It teaches us gratitude. Every freedom we enjoy, our ability to speak, to dream, to live in relative peace, was bought with a price. We owe it to them to live lives worthy of their sacrifice. It teaches us humility. My grandfather never called himself a hero. He reminded me that heroism isn't about medals, it's about doing what's right. Even when it's hard, even when no one is watching, and it teaches us remembrance. Memory is not just about looking back. It's about carrying forward. When we tell their stories, we keep them alive. When we honor their sacrifice, we ensure it was not in vain. When I think of my grandfather now, I don't just see the soldier. I see the man who taught me how to plant seeds, who showed me the value of patience, who smiled at the simplest joys of life. But I also see the young man who risked everything, who stood in the mud of battle so that I could stand here today, free. The Purple Heart he earned sits now in our family, not as a treasure to be locked away, but as a torch to be passed on. It reminds us to live with courage, to face our own battles, whatever they may be, with the same quiet strength he did. And when my children ask me one day, who was he? I will tell them, he was a man who fought not just for his family, not just for his country, but for the world. And because of him and millions like him, we are free. That is my grandfather's story. A story of sacrifice, resilience, and love. A story we must never forget.